I think we could start rolling and,
Great.
people will join in as they're able.
Fantastic.
Yes. I'm gonna black myself out, whatever it's called. And so have
Okay.
a great talk.
Oh, you
Okay.
just wanted to jump in and say hi, and now you're gonna have
Yeah,
dinner or something?
I'm gonna have dinner while I listen. Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll forgive.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice
Now I have to
meeting.
pick
Good seeing you.
the same.
So there goes Mindy Sprith. Okay. So I want to know a little bit. I don't even know if I know the answers to these questions, but I definitely was waiting for today to be able to ask about one, your entry into metalsmithing, and two, then why Argentium or how Argentium. Those are real curiosities I have. And feel free to talk about anything else, including your dog, whatever.
Oh, he's right here.
I
Oh,
know.
he just perked up and went. Um, well, I started making jewelry 30 plus years ago. And like a lot of people, I started beading, the gateway drug. And then you want to like make a jump ring and solder it. And so you go and take a metalsmithing class. So that's what I did. And then I became addicted. And like I said, that was about 30 or so years ago. And pretty soon some of you might know me, not from Argentium, but from weaving. I discovered weaving and I fell in love with it. And I took classes from Mary Lee Hugh and Jeannie Pratt. And there's not that many people that
Right.
teach weaving, but I was lucky enough to go kind of across the country. I went to Revere Academy, I went to Metalworks. So I didn't have like a traditional BFA kind of thing. I just learned from really good people.
Mhm.
So while I love weaving, I've been doing it for a really long time. And when the pandemic hit, well, I didn't have any shows. I'm sitting at home and I'm like, well, I've been wanting to learn more about Argentium. I'd taken a little taste of it and I had the time. So I taught myself all about, well, as much about Argentium as I know. And I absolutely adore it. And I started teaching Argentium 2.5 years ago at Little Street, your counterpart here in Chicago. Um, Last May, I got to go out to Dallas and take a class with Rhonda Corell. And if any of you aren't familiar with that name, she's kind of the queen of Argentium and has been since it was introduced in the 90s. She was a longtime teacher at Revere Academy. So yeah, it's been quite the journey, and um, I'm really enjoying working with it because to me, it's pretty much a wondrous metal. So
So I'm curious, by the people that are in this room with us right now, will you guys put in the chat like a yes or no if you've worked with Argenium? Because that'll help us know
yeah,
how to move this. Corey's a yes. Mindy's a no. I'm a yes.
yes, you are, yes.
Stephanie's a yes. Colin, how good. I love the Argenium Virgin. That's a little
Okay.
old version. Is that before the new formula?
Yeah, she's probably talking about 935 when they went to 940 last about a year or so ago.
So we're a mixed group, which is great, right?
Yeah, it is
Okay.
great.
So
So
take it away, girl. Take it away.
take it away. What's our next question? Um, okay, why I love Argentium?
Why don't you tell a little bit about how it's different than sterling with that or fine silver? Mhm.
Sure. Well, first of all, like I said before, it's 940. It has a higher content of silver than regular sterling silver. And the magic of it is it does not get fire scale. Okay.
Is that because of the germanium?
Yeah, the germanium, which I always say geranium, but
Uranium.
hey, yeah, yeah. Somebody always corrects me.
Yeah.
Because and it's whiter and it's tarnish resistant. Nothing is tarnish free. I especially find with the tarnish part of it that, hi, Popper.
Doesn't he look like Gus?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. I had to just.
Um, Everybody appreciates the doggo, I hope. Um, is that, like when I'm handling it, like if I leave a fingerprint on it and if I go back and I take that piece out, that's where you might see a little discoloring. But for the most part, switching from sterling silver to Argentium makes my getting ready for shows so much easier because I don't have to pull out my stuff to clean everything up again because it's all been tarnished from sitting. So that's a wondrous thing. Other wonderful things about it, it fuses to itself. And the difference between fusing and soldering, okay, I'm just talking basic here and I'm not talking down, is that it doesn't need solder to join. You are joining just with the heat of a torch, okay? So what happens is that the surface of the Argentium melts and that captures and fuses and creates a bond between whatever you're joining together. So and then in the class, we'll discuss what that means for golds, especially. We'll talk about fusing dust and what to look for and what to look for to see that melting temperature and how far to leave your torch on and just all that kind of thing. Because obviously, if you're getting the surface to melting temperature, you're not too far away from getting your piece to melt. Okay, so there's some torch control involved, but honestly, since I've been teaching it for the last couple of years, people really seem to learn it pretty quickly.
I think it's like melting butter in a pan. You know, it's just like you just know what to do right after.
Yeah,
And if
after
you're
a while,
making chains for people that make chains, I think it's magical.
that make chains, I bet. Yeah, I don't make chains, but I can imagine because you wouldn't have to be pick soldering
Mhm.
little pieces of solder up and down, clean up. Now, that being said, when you fuse a seam, it is not 100% clean. Sometimes you have to go in and clean up that join. Because what it's forming, it's melting a little bit, and sometimes it's a little bit irregular, but it is a lot cleaner. One thing about Argentium is that once you solder it, it becomes, excuse me, fuse it, it becomes slightly discolored, but it basically remains bright. And you sometimes you would go and you would pickle it if you have another fusing to do. If you don't, sometimes you don't even have to pickle it. The other thing that I really love about it is that prior to starting to work with Argentium, I really oxidized almost everything in my au revoir. It's just given me such a great appreciation for the color because it is so beautiful and bright. Now, fine silver has that same sort of brightness to it, obviously has even a higher content, but it's soft, right? So it doesn't really hold up to some applications. At least I don't feel it does. Um, so yeah, I mean, those are some of the reasons. And yeah, I just kind of jumped in with 2 feet, melted stuff. You're going to melt something, it's going to happen. But the good thing is that I'm also going to show you ways you could use something that you melted to make dust. So,
So, like when you're using sterling and you
yeah,
have scrap or you have metal that you want to reuse, you're just making it and use it again. Can you do that with Argentium too?
yep, sure can.
Okay.
Yep, blow it out just like you would.
And is there copper in it too, like there is in sterling?
No, there's no
Okay.
copper in it.
So we don't have, it's not going to reticulate, it's not going to oxidize. It's good.
No.
Yeah.
No. You can use oxidizing agents,
Right. Right.
which I find work pretty much as well as they do on regular sterling.
Yeah. And
Um,
when you bring up sterling, when I thought there were so many rules, I was so afraid to use it at first. And then a friend of mine who's used Argentium mostly all of her metalsmithing years, she's very young, so maybe I don't know how long
okay.
Argentium's been around for, but she said she mixes and matches it with sterling all the time. And I know some people say not to do that, but you know, if I'm using a traditional sterling silver bezel wire, I'll fuse or solder that
Right,
Argentium.
exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about the interplay? Because I know a purist might say use all Argentium, but
I am
um,
not a purist.
uh-huh.
And, sometimes when you're learning metalsmithing, it's like, oh, you have to hand fabricate everything and casting's cheating.
Uh-huh.
So when I came to Argentium, I had that kind of same mindset about it. Everything needs to be fused, da 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 da. No. So if
Mhm.
I go through 3 fusings on a piece and all I have to do is put on that air post, do you think I'm gonna go and get it to fusing temperature? Or am I gonna get out my easy solder and solder on an air post or a bale or anything like that? Of course. I do still mix sterling silver depending on what it is. Sometimes I'll use sterling as an air wire. I especially use sterling jump rings. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of times that little jump ring is the last thing that you're soldering your clasp to. And you have it in your third hand pointed up so that it can be nice and clean. It can just get right in there. Well, if it's an Argentium one, the pressure of those tweezers is going to crack that jump ring and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So sterling's in there. Um, and and the other thing about, we were discussing this prior to letting the folks in, a fused bond is not quite as strong as a soldered bond, okay? So because of that fact, when I know that I have to do any kind of a lot of forming after I've fused something, I will solder. That like a ring, like let's say, or maybe, okay, like a cuff bracelet and I have end caps on it, and I'll solder those end caps because then I'm going to put it into the hydraulic press and use my fancy little bracelet formers to do all that forming work for me, faux forming as my friend would call it, but it works for me. And because I'm going to be putting quite a lot of pressure on that joint. So that we'll discuss that in class, when it's best to solder, when it's better to fuse. But the thing with the fusing is it has really opened up design possibilities that you would not be able to do if you had to use solder. If you're familiar at all with my Argentium work, I do a lot of texture and granulation. So I'm using dust and gold and Argentium silver dust, and I'm sprinkling it on in layers till I get the look that I want. If I had to use solder to solder dust, what would that be? That'd be a pile of mush, right? So, and same with granulation. Now, if you want to just add one, little ball as an accent, sure, throw, make a little divot, put a little piece of solder in and throw your ball in there and solder it up, fine. But if you're doing a whole thing of granulation, then you're just going to have a mess. And I'm all about easy, and I'm all about, you just actually really wouldn't be able to do it, frankly.
Well, you can do it, but it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. You can do it, but trying to clean up all that solder, I
Well,
mean,
you don't confuse sterling. So you don't,
yes,
or you confuse fine silver to sterling, which is when
yes,
people do granulation, they often do that. But once you use Argenium, you kind of ask yourself, why would you bother
yeah.
the other
Yeah,
way?
I've used fine silver.
Mhm.
In classes, we talk about bezels and
Yeah,
choices with bezels. So yeah, it's for me, I really feel like it just opened a big window
that's
into
great.
design.
Some of
So
the differences you've already highlighted, but for example, when the quench story,
uh
when if you're used to using sterling and you're good with your little solder pick, you can move things around if you need to. If a joint isn't quite close enough, if you're handy, you can just push it a little. Can you talk about those properties, even though I know you'll talk about it more in your class, about some of the
well,
differences?
in the class, one of the first project is actually taking advantage of
Oops.
the fact that it can be brittle when hot. Um, So we're going to be part, or I'm going to show you how to do that, and then you can morph it into what you want it to be. But yes, Argentium has some brittle factors that are, like I mentioned about string, okay? You can't put a lot of pressure on it when it is red hot. because you can, I mean, like if I took my solder pick and I tried to force when it was red hot, you'd be in danger of cracking. Now,
Yeah.
940 has solved some of the issues with the brittleness of it and the
Mhm.
slumping that it would do, but it's not 100%. But
Mhm.
the wait time between when you take your flame off and you set it aside, most of the time all of the time, I'm fusing on a charcoal block. I'll transfer it to a cool charcoal block. I'll let it sit for a moment or two. Before you had to really let it sit for and let it really cool down. Now it cools quicker, or actually you can quench it quicker than you could before. So the rule of thumb is sort of like if you drop a droplet of water on it, if it dances around like the dude at
Stick.
the auto stop, like one of those flowy
Yeah.
things at the auto shop, then that's too hot. If it's, then it's good to go into the pickle. So does anybody have any questions so far they want to ask? Um, I covered a little bit about the difference about 935 and 940. Um, not yet. Okay.
And then, Linda, are you thinking that your class is going to be more technique based than project based?
More project based, I think. What I plan to do is that everybody would see my demos. It's not really my style. It is just for purpose of learning the technique. So
Uh-huh.
I would um, have a kit or obligations of a kit where you would get X amount of metal, and then you could do what you want. Or if you just want to do my design demo and you don't want to think about having to create a design, because sometimes that's very helpful when you're learning, where you don't have to think about the design elements and you just make what you see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, so it is going to be more project based, but like I was saying before, I really like input in classes. I like, people to take me to different places if they want to. Um, like, oh, you just mentioned this. Can you show us that? Or, talking about tools and things that make your life a little bit easier. I also teach advanced techniques in metal at Lil. I teach the hydraulic press class at Lil. So there's a lot of ways that, I use it in my work. So you might say, how did you do that? I'm not adverse to, mixing it up. But my goal for the people in this class is that after 3 days that they feel confident to fuse Argentium silver.
Mm-hmm. And
And
to do other forms of fabrication, like if someone wants to know how to make a ring band, how would you do that? Like, will they know how to do that?
sure. One of the demos that I've done in the past and I could do here is to simply make 2 or 3 stacking rings out
Mm-hmm.
of 16 gauge Argentium wire. Show you how I create a ring, fuse them,
Mm-hmm.
form them, and then fuse them together as a band.
Yeah.
And then what I've done in the past is also to then granulate with Argentium on the top of the ring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then further in the class, and this will be, and this is entirely up to you as a student, and as somebody who knows that gold is really freaking expensive, that I will demo 22 karat granulation, and I will demo how to fuse gold dust, which is also 22
Mm-hmm.
gauge. Now, the reason why it's 22 gauge and not anything less is because the fusing temperature of 18 karat gold is so close to the melting temp of Argentium that what happens is it can sink into your metal. Nobody wants gold to sink into silver. It doesn't feel good. I've tried it. And it's maybe possible, but after talking to 2 like master goldsmiths about it, they're like, what? No, 22. You just go right to 22.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Have you done 18?
No.
No. Yeah, I've
And
tried.
when I solder 22, I use 18 karat solder for that same reason, that the melting temperature is so close. And there are
Yes.
people who are great at it. I'm just not doing that.
Yeah, yeah, it's so risky. Um, but you'll understand more about the way that Argentium works when you see what happens when it gets hot and why that would happen. That layer that creates the bond just overtakes and your goal goes foom. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
not fun.
correct.
Yeah. So
Okay. So it
yeah.
sounds like it'll be both, that people will be able to make a thing, something,
Oh yeah.
be teaching, and then if there's a variation on that and there's time and people are interested, you'll provide that information pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I plan for the first project is a pendant,
Uh-huh.
and the second project would be using. I would show you how to create the silver dust in two
Mhm.
ways,
Mhm.
and then to use the silver dust in a design of your own or of my demo for
Mhm.
your earrings. So you should be able to get at least them started, both started.
I'm gonna intermittently mute myself. I told my husband not to make so much noise in here making a salad, so he went in the other room to play his violin, which is gonna come into
I
the.
can hear it.
You can't win for losing. Anyway, please put your questions if you have them in the chat, and we'll be able to answer. Or you just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a question. If we're unable to attend all 3 days, what are the viewing options after?
You get a recording for 30 days after the last day, but every night we upload our recording from the day. So, later in the evening, I'd say if the class ends at 5, by 8 o'clock or so, you should have the recording from the day. So sometimes if people can't make it for a day, then they can watch it that evening and in a sense catch up. Or, you can just continue on and watch it afterwards. So you'll have the complete video of the 3 days for at least 30 days.
Perfect. Thanks.
I have a question, Mindy here.
Hi.
Hi. My question is about materials.
Yeah.
Did you say that you'll have some kits available, or should we just buy everything that's on the material list?
We would send out the material list prior so that you could purchase it yourself.
We already,
Um, What's that?
we already have your material list, don't we?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
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 So yeah,
Yeah.
I thought I might have heard the word kit, and I was like, no, I
Right.
think it was just, everything on the list, and all that stuff correlates or collates with the different projects that you just mentioned.
Correct.
Yeah, so we're
Thank
not
you
doing,
for clarifying.
Perfect.
kit. Everybody just
Perfect.
gets their own stuff. Uh-huh.
Perfect.
Yeah, that would be scary to go and buy it all and then, yeah. So let me just be practical about Argentium. If you haven't purchased it before, it is a little bit more expensive than regular sterling silver because it has a higher content. But if you've purchased fine silver, you've probably already dealt with that little bit of a discrepancy. But yeah, it's worth it.
Well, and then what you said, that you can't replicate everything the same way if you're using a different metal. And so the Argentium is going to make your balls prettier. It's going to make your granulation easier. You're going to fuse instead of have to solder.
Yeah.
Right. So all that
Well,
saves.
that's so true about the granulation part of it. It
Mhm.
balls up amazingly well, just like fine silver does. You know, how fine silver gets that regular brown ball and sterling gets wrinkly sometimes, or it just doesn't behave. The balls are usually perfect. Um, yeah. So what else do we have on that list?
I'm looking at my questions. Anybody curious about anything that we haven't already covered? No. Argentium's been around long enough that it's not like the it child, the new magic so much as it used to be. But what I find is that there's a mystery about it that has people like shying away from it. It's kind of like, Oh, I don't know how to use that. I don't know. I heard it's really complex. And I think when people are really expert at it and they're going to do an intensive workshop around using a new something, that people are like, oh, I don't know. I'm happy with my car. I don't need a new one, or I'm happy with my whatever. I don't need a new one. And I think the transition for people who've been doing metalsmithing is that Argentium is just like a pleasure. It's not hard. It's just like, oh, I never knew this could do this, right? Like there's a magic about it that adds to your arsenal if you've never done it before, as opposed to feeling really intimidated by having to learn something new. Would you say?
That is exactly the case. And I had been wanting to work with it for years, like I said, but it was like, you sit down and you go, am I going to give myself the time to play with this when I have this show coming up or, blah, blah, blah. And I had the time. I had the luxury of time to teach myself. And and learning something, you have this idea, am I going to have to, change out all my tools because I can't use the same tools with Argentium? No, you can use the same tools. The only thing, if you're used to using paste flux, when you're using sterling, I do not recommend you use paste flux. Paste flux has a tendency to pit the metal a bit, and nobody wants that. So one thing about Argentium solder that is a little bit different is that, first of all, Argentium solder only comes in medium and soft. Okay, they don't actually make a hard Argentium solder. Can you use regular silver solders? Yes, but you cannot use hard because the melting temperature of hard solder is higher, and yeah, you'll just have a mess. But I don't know if have you used Argentium solder, Susan?
But I fuse most of my Argentium, so I don't use solder.
Okay, so when you use Argentium solder, the only thing that I found is that it acts a little bit differently. Like, let's say, once again, I'm putting on an air post. I usually create a divot, like a lot of you probably do, in the back of the earring, so that I can kind of pick torch with the post and have the little ball of Argentium on it. I find that the Argentium solder floods out a little quicker. You know how sometimes when you're using sterling solder, it kind of creates a sort of cone-shaped base at the bottom of your post? Well, I like that because that means that post is not going to go anywhere. So I find that the Argentium solder sort of floods out, so you have only the parallel connection.
Mhm.
So I generally use regular sterling solder for that.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
So, I mean, those are the kind of things that you don't know until you've done it.
Mhm.
But those are the kind of things that I can tell you, don't do that, or don't do that, or do this.
And
So,
I also think that it's for people who want to transition into working with higher carat gold. My experience is that Argentium behaves a lot like gold.
yes,
And you're putting your heat on your spot. You're not necessarily having, you correct me, but my experience has been that I don't have to bring everything up to flow temperature, that area that I'm soldering will flow sooner.
yes.
um,
You have
which,
to get the whole piece hot, but you
right.
don't have to get the whole piece to flow temperature. So yes, in that way, it does act a lot more like gold. Um, and that's the other tricky thing about when you're mixing the metals, is that even with 22 karat, if you overfuse and you melt more of the top, then that can kind of creep up onto your gold. So all of a sudden you have gold balls that have Argentium coating on it. So it's about torch control. So that is why my plan is, if you want to get some 22 karat and you want to explore in class with, I'm going to demo that, but it is up to you, and I will guide you, obviously, whether or not you want to actually make the investment and do it. If you just want to see it, I completely understand.
But
Uh,
a little gold dust goes a long way. I mean, to
oh,
us,
yeah. Well, that's the thing about, I love mixed metals. Generally my palette is, white for the silver, black for the oxidized, and high carat gold. I love that combination. And a lot of my jewelry reflects that. I love texture. Yeah, so just adding that little bit of gold really heightens perceived value. Now, you know, I'll tell my Argentium classes, like what I'll do is I'll come in and I'm gonna, you know, do a few gold balls on a piece that I own because Little Street won't pay for my gold. So I'll weigh the piece prior to adding the gold. I'll weigh the gold. I will weigh the piece after adding the gold, and then knowing how much it weighs, I can figure out how much gold I used. And how much that is. So this sounds like a lot of money, but I just recently made a pair of earrings that had 7 gold balls in a inside of a circle. And so it was 14 total at $1.50 per gold ball. Well, I just added for 30 whatever dollars that is, I just added a lot of bang and a lot of like interest and a lot of perceived value. So that's why I like mixing in. I mean, I probably would love to work with all gold, but I personally like the look of mixed metals.
Yeah, it's a nice contrast.
You have reached a, oh, okay.
Yeah, just ignore that. It's still recording.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's, yeah. So now I've pretty much, am solely I'm doing a little bit of woven work still. But I mainly am doing Argentium. I've had a pretty good response. So yeah.
And mostly granulation.
Granulation and dust.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, gold dust, silver dust, texture. I made a commitment to myself because I went on a little buying spree with rare earth mining before the new year, and I bought some fabulous stones. So I am incorporating some stones in the new year.
Glad to hear.
Yeah. But yeah, it's fun.
Uh-huh. And then would you, if you were using stones and you were going to make a bezel from a silver product, would you use silver Argentium bezel, or would you use silver, or it just doesn't really matter?
I cut silver sheet Argentium silver sheet.
Uh-huh.
So it is recommended not to use anything less than 24 gauge if you're planning to fuse your bezel. It's simply it's a tricky thing
Right. Right.
yeah. I personally never use anything less than 24 gauge and never really have. I think, and this is going to be very controversial. But I personally feel that asking a 28 gauge piece of fine silver to last the lifetime of a person and then to be passed on to whoever gets it the next time is asking that silver to do a lot of work for something that's really, really soft and really, really thin, especially if you're setting a big stone. So yeah, so I use Argentium silver for bezels.
Yeah.
But fine silver also fuses to it. So if you're attached to your fine silver, you can fuse that to the Argentium as well.
But if you were doing a bezel on a silver or Argentium back sheet, like I was talking about mixing and matching, if I want to do some, I have Argentium sheet, but sometimes what I'm doing requires that the back sheet be sterling. If I want to reticulate, if I want to do something else to the surface, right? So
Yeah.
if your back sheet was sterling, could you still integrate an Argentium bezel, or would you be like, why bother?
Yeah, I would solder it though.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then regular solder will work if you're attaching sterling to Argentium.
You can really use regular sterling solder for almost everything. The color different, it's about it tarnishing, right? I mean, that's always the deal with regular silver solder is that the first place where a piece is going to tarnish is going to be on a solder line, or it's going to darken. But yeah, I frequently use regular silver solder for the reasons that I pointed out earlier about it kind of cooling out a little bit, the Argentium solder. So yeah, but you would have to start with medium. So in the case if you were doing a fine silver bezel, you can fuse a fine silver bezel. It's not the easiest thing to do, because especially if it's really thin fine silver, but you can fuse it and you can then fuse it to the sheet. I would recommend actually, and what we've found in class, we'd like to experiment in my Argentium classes. So we'll get like side by side bezels, see what works best, whether it works better. What we found is that to solder the fine silver bezel with hard solder, and then you can then fuse it to the base of the Argentium, because now you've gotten it to a higher melting point with the hard solder.
Mhm.
So,
And then this is probably better for in the class, but
can I sip since can I sip?
yeah. It's a sip and saw. You can sip whatever you want. I'll be sipping a coffee martini or something, but I'll be up all night. So if you were making something where you wanted, like, let's say you were making, I don't know, not really a chain, but if you were making dangly hoop earrings and you wanted two hoops on there, right? So you do
Yeah.
your first, but then when you're doing the second, are there tricks to keep the melted surface from sticking to the second ring? You know how the surface gets warm, and so you would have to do something to keep it from touching. Do you know what I'm saying? So that this doesn't stick. So like the first thing doesn't
So are
stick.
we connecting those two with a jump ring? Is that
No,
what you're saying?
just
Oh,
interlocking. Like
oh,
if
oh, 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 I
I
gotcha.
don't know if you can see my fingers.
Yeah, I do. I understand what you're saying. Um, hmm. You know, like I said, holding in a third arm is going to be risky in that
Right.
situation. You can't pull it up. I
Right.
mean, the only thing that I can think of, because I don't make chain,
Okay.
is that I would probably just do it flat and make sure that the tail of whatever I'm working is the furthest away from the
Right.
join as possible.
Okay.
But you're right. If you're dealing with very little, small little jump rings, then getting that one hot could fuse the two together.
So you
Um,
just know when it's to your advantage to use it and when not to, like you were
yeah,
saying.
yeah,
And that I would imagine will come up during the course of a workshop, and that you'll be able, as things come up, to say,
sure.
sometimes when people are gonna work with wax, it doesn't make sense to fabricate something in wax because it's easy enough to do with
Right,
metal, right? Easier,
right.
right? So
Yeah. The cleanup on some wax or whatever is going to be worse than if you
Mhm.
pull out, yeah, make it yourself. Yeah, for sure. Um,
So
so,
how about other people? Questions? I know we're a small bunch.
okay. Well, I just, I'm a big fan of it. Yeah, I really have enjoyed working with it. Like I said, the design possibilities have been just, eye-opening for me, reinvigorating for me. Um, and it's similar enough to what you've already learned about sterling silver that it isn't this huge leap of faith or um, leap of new tools that you would have to get if you started working with platinum per se or whatever. Yeah, uh, it's been good. It's been good.
Mhm. So I think it's really a door opener for people, especially if there's been some hesitation to jump in because it
Yeah.
was too much. I think that after a weekend, you will be able to comfortably incorporate using Argenium. And then it's just a matter of practice in terms of technique, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
just getting comfortable with knowing what you're watching and looking for when you're fusing. Um, Seeing how it reacts. Sometimes when you're fusing sheet to sheet, you can get an air bubble. How to rectify that. When to use flux, when not to use flux. Um, yeah, most of the time you're using flux, but in the case of sheet to sheet, the flux can kind of get underneath the pieces, and it has a tendency to bubble up more. So you can actually fuse it just completely without any flux.
So what we would normally call sweat soldering, you're just fusing two pieces.
Yep.
right?
Yep. Without the solder. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Yes.
One other thing I thought about.
Mm.
Oh, do you use flux? You know, if you just had a loop that you wanted to fuse together, a ring band that you wanted to fuse together, would you use flux for that even if you were using no solder?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I don't, even in Rhonda's class, you know, she used Flux for basically everything. But she wasn't fusing sheet to sheet at that point. And she has a Flux of her own. Do you have it?
Purple?
Yeah, the purple. The reason why I like the purple is that, so let's say you have, let's say I have a circle pattern and I've filled the circle with a bunch of, um, of granulated balls. So I flux the bottom of the piece before adding the granulated balls. Well, what happens is it doesn't bubble up as much as like the yellow flux or the red flux or whatever other fluxes. It kind of just goes, breathes, and then settles. So it just kind of like gives a little and then settles back down. So because if you were using one that really had to bubble out, then you're going to get this kind of, them getting all mishmash and you're having to, rearrange them and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's
So,
weird.
yeah, that's
Well,
my finding. You've used the purple flux?
I got it because I thought I needed it, but I couldn't really tell too much difference. I usually use just like a Prips kind of flux. But yes, I know
Yeah.
not to use flux. But I don't think I don't think I use flux when I'm fusing. It'd probably be helpful. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's not oxidizing, like in keeping the sterling silver join clean the way that regular flux job is to do. But I think it does aid um, in getting the bond.
Or protecting the metal maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So well that's good. We want to bond.
Yeah.
Actually all want to bond with you over your
Oh,
weekend when you come teach.
oh,
Um, so you guys, the registration for the class is live right now. I trust that it'll be both online and in studio. And if you are local to Atlanta, come play in our studio. If you're far away and you want to stay home and do it virtually, of course, that'll be an option too. We have really good cameras and we have capable camera people. And I don't think anything will be lost in translation if you do it online instead of in the workshop. Um, and um, I am, let's see, if you just get in touch with Mag and you have questions, our office manager, Ryan, will be there to take your calls. And if you have questions that you need to get to me, you can just write me an email at susan@metalartsguildga.org. And I can put that in the chat, although this might end before you have a chance to do it. I'll put it for everybody if I can figure that out. Stephanie, I have it to you. I have to make it to everyone. Send chat to meeting group chat. Okay. So Susan at Metal Arts Guild GA.org. Oh, not Susan too. Susan at. Okay. And then you can get in touch with me and I'll help you through the process if you need anything or you have questions. And that's it. Anyone else? Last
I
doorknob
think,
confetti?
well, I just think this sounds phenomenal. I just
Yeah,
really
me too.
do. Yeah.
thank you.
Excited about the opportunity.
I don't know if I hadn't, if, yeah, I would have taken a class. I just find taking a class when it's something that's new to me, it's just, it just settles me. I mean, you're not dealing with flour and eggs to bake a loaf of bread. You're dealing with things that cost something. So
Mhm.
that can be prohibitive sometimes for when you're learning the cost of whatever you're learning with. But yeah, um, it's a good way to get your feet wet.
And as much as information is available and a lot of free information actually available online, I find that there's a lot of less helpful information online too, that people anoint themselves experts in things that they really probably shouldn't. And I'm all for people learning elbow to elbow, but when it's something new and there are properties of these metals that behave differently together than what you might be accustomed to, it's a real time saver to have somebody that knows the properties of the metal that can look at what you're doing and say, oh, try this instead. And it's just a little step in one direction to the side of what you've been doing, and it makes a world of difference. And I think that's still the beauty of learning with each other in an arena where there's somebody who's very familiar, or dare I say expert at working with, they say if you travel far, you're an expert, but I think I feel comfortable calling you an expert.
Well, I enjoy it and I like working with it. And,
You
I
do it a
even,
lot. Uh-huh.
what's that?
You do it a lot. It's in your
It's in my blood now.
DNA. Yeah.
But even when I went out to take a class with Rhonda in Dallas, and it's not inexpensive,
Right.
taking a class in person and flying out and da da da. But I really wanted to do it. Honestly, I knew a high percentage of what she was teaching already. But that was affirming for me to
Right.
know that as a teacher. And to know that I know more than I thought I knew. How's
Right.
that?
Right.
So, but everybody does things differently. So it was like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. There's always that in classes. Like
Mhm.
I hadn't thought of doing it that way before. Or, in the 30 years that I've been making jewelry, nobody's ever shown me how to do it that way. Hey, that's cool. So that's the benefit of the in-class,
Mhm.
um, experiences. I mean, Zoom is great. It really has made things more affordable, knowledge more attainable.
Mhm.
So that is an awesome thing too.
Well, we'll have the option for people to be able to learn online without the cost of traveling across the country, which is really nice.
It
And
is, yeah.
your own bed. And when we teach a class in the studio while somebody's doing a demo, we ask for people to be quiet so that the noise doesn't transfer into the homes of the people online. But the people online can mute themselves and practice along with the demonstrations. And so there are benefits to both. And if you can join us, we'd love to have you in the studio. And if you're far away, we'd love to have you virtually in our studio, because we will have big screens up and we'll be able to see you. And we'll include you. And then what we do is we have the instructor that's visiting in the studio during times that people are working, then take a computer, we have this big screen that has everybody on it, like I don't know, checkerboard of, it's just a big Zoom screen. And then the person in this case would be Linda, can go and spend one-on-one time with you via Zoom and or FaceTime, or some people send pictures, or they do, they hold up their thing and they're like, this is what I'm doing right now. And then the instructor can watch and offer guidance so that it's pretty one-to-one, which is nice. And then if there's something that comes up in a one-to-one with somebody online that is valuable information for everybody, that adds to the teaching overall. So if that makes sense, there's a reciprocity that we offer each other, and it works out really nicely. So we hope that you'll think about joining us. And
Yes.
the workshop, it's 2 weeks away, right? Or is it 3? I gotta look. My day.
2.5, I think. Two.
Okay, so what day is it? It's Sunday. So
Second.
next week
So that would be
is,
the 21st.
yeah. So is that
19 days.
not this weekend, but the next one, and the one
19
after.
days out.
So weekend after Valentine's weekend. Is that right? 15th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you for being with us. And like I said, this recording will be available on our YouTube station shortly, as soon as we hang up. It should be live streaming, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If it works, it should be live streaming. I don't really understand how it works. It just happens kind of magically. So.
Oh, that's cool. Good.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, there's one new message.
Shelby says, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully I'll meet you all in person.
I would love that.
I would like it too.
Wait, I don't know how to get back to you. I just did that. Okay, there you are. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
if everyone's done, we can close this party. Then you can get on with your Sunday. Mindy, you want to say something? Your thing lit up for me.
Oh, I don't know what, gosh, God knows what I'm trying to write thank you, but I can't drink my wine and write thank you and everything at the same time.
Don't
But,
try to multitask. Just
No.
drink your wine, girl.
yes, yes, but as somebody who's known Linda for quite some time, you will all benefit by studying with her, and I can't give you enough praises. So
Thank you.
y'all take her class.
Plus, you can tell from this conversation that Linda's just really easy to be with, disarming, not intimidating, and a lot of fun.
And a plethora of information.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes.
Right. Plethora.
Yes, I don't even know if I used that word, if I ever used that right, but yeah.
You did.
Yes, I think
I do like to have fun in classes. I like to joke around. I just, I'm kind of goofy. So,
Not the best way. Yeah.
yeah.
So thank
All
you
right.
all.
Thank you
All
all
right.
for attending. I
Sure.
appreciate you listening to me bark on for an hour there. Have a happy Sunday.
Mhm. You too. Stay toasty, and we'll talk soon.
I know. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.